talking today with John Shields. John has been campaigning for his son for decades and has suffered the most appalling abuse at the hands of the Scottish state and at the hands of multiple agencies of the Scottish state. His campaign to get justice both for himself and for his son goes on, and I've had the pleasure of supporting him in that for some years now. It's come to time where we've established now the details of the case, and we've got documentation to back up everything that we're saying. So we want to actually lay this out in a series of interviews so that people can understand the seriousness of what John has been through and the implications for everyone living in Scotland, and indeed the wider UK and the wider West, because the problems he's seen are problems which are endemic all through our society. This is going to be a series of interviews. We're going to take it section by section because the story is so complex and so difficult that to try and cram it all into one interview, we would lose the impact and lose the important detail. So we're going to take it step by step. So this is going to be part one, and this is just going to introduce the background to the case and introduce John's son, who's central to everything we're about to talk about, and who is a very unique human being. So let's start there, John, with your son, John Jr. So could you tell me about when he was born and your sort of earliest memories of him?
Hey David, thanks for the interview. John William Shields, that's his name, was born 25th August 1983 in Rotten Row Hospital in Glasgow. When he was born, there was a problem where he had he was born with a disability which they didn't know nothing about. It took 24 years before they realised that John had an additional stem cell which caused a severe learning disability, which meant his disability was he couldn't speak, he can't really do anything for himself, and it left me at the time with my ex-wife to bring up a boy where hospitals, doctors couldn't tell us what to expect, what his life expectancy was going to be. We had absolutely no idea what an additional stem cell would do to a child. We never had any idea, but we went through a severe bad time bringing John up, because John at that time was taking severe seizures. Well, he was taking a lot of seizures. He actually, first one took place when he was 8 months old. I was on holiday at my sister's, and while I'm walking with him, trying to calm him down, get me sleep, the next minute he felt really heavy in my arms, and I looked at him and he was blue. He just wasn't breathing, and I was screaming, running through my sister's house saying, he's not breathing, he's not breathing. My sister shouted to a neighbour who came running into the house and started slapping my son in the feet, and the next minute John came to and let out a scream, started crying, screaming, and then after that we still didn't know what was happening, as I said, and we come home. I was away for a wee break. We come home the next day. I was sitting in my house at that time with my ex-wife in Cumbernauld, where my son took another seizure, and we didn't know what it was before we knew. An ambulance was called, paramedics appeared at my house, and before I knew it, my son was getting taken to Monklands Hospital, and he had a mask which completely covered his face because he wasn't breathing again. He stopped breathing. But this was the damage. It was he had brain damage that nobody really knew nothing about, as I said, and this went on throughout his life. He was hard to look after, had problems, as I said, as well as my ex-wife also had a daughter, Jennifer, and she did lose a lot because John needed 100% care. He couldn't do nothing for himself. Back in the 80s, the help for families with children like John just wasn't there. As I said, and at that time, the health side of it, you know, like finding out what would happen to John, what his problems were, there just was nobody that could help you back then. As I said, John was taken into the sick children's hospital, attended on a basis to try to find out what was wrong with him, but they couldn't. Eventually, we were getting medical diagnoses, which I think they just gave us them because they didn't really know what was wrong with John. And it wasn't until later on, you know, in his life that we discovered that John had an additional stem cell in his body, which meant, if anybody knows about stem cells, John, instead of having 2 pairs of stem cells, my son had an additional stem cell in his body, which was put down to like a freak of nature, is what they called it, a freak of nature. And it still didn't give us any idea what was happening with John, which eventually I had myself and my new wife took the issue on board and went to find out more about him.
So the extra stem cell, how rare is that? I mean, worldwide, how rare is that as a condition? Is there, are there support groups for this? Is there much known about it?
Yes, we did. There is a support group. John, what happened was when John was staying with me and my wife, we brought him up. I had removed him from care when he was 12, and we got on with his life trying to figure out what we do with him to give his life. I ended up going to 9 Wells Hospital in Dundee and asking, look, can I get genetic testing done on my son? I says, because we don't know how to deal with him. We had no idea what was wrong with him. And eventually the people at 9 Wells Hospital done testing. Always done testing on his genes. They tested me, they tested, went into his family background. Eventually it came round that we were sent to an organisation called Unique, who are mostly based in England, but these people were able to look at the genetic build-up and discover what was wrong with John, and also give us a wee idea what to expect in his life. And they were the ones that actually did do it. They done blood tests, and they ended up giving John what they call a karyotype. And a karyotype is, after his name, there's a lot of numbers after it, and this numbers means to them a lot. To me, doesn't mean nothing to me. So eventually what happened was they done a worldwide search of all medical groups, all anything to do with health service right across the world, and it came back that my son was the only human being in the world to have an additional stem cell in his body.
So it's absolutely unique.
Yeah, he is unique. There is nobody else like him in the world.
So could you tell us a little bit about what he can and can't do? Walking, talking. What's the limit of his ability, and how does he communicate, and what ways does he communicate? Things like this. Could you just outline as he went through childhood, what was the development path, and what did he become able to do, and what couldn't he do?
To be perfectly honest with you, John's capabilities are he can't do nothing. He's got to have near enough everything done for himself. As I said, he will never be able to live himself. He'll always need 24-hour care. 24/7 is what John gets, and that's what he needs. There is no other way of looking at it. He'll never be able to go hold a job down. He will never be able to have a family life. He'll never be able to have children. This was explained to us by the organisation Unique. John's walking capabilities, he can walk for himself, but he knows no danger. If you couldn't walk out in the street yourself. He couldn't go anywhere outside on his own. He would just walk onto a road. He doesn't know that it's dangerous. Danger to John is just something he'll never have. And this becomes part of the problem of him being an adult. You know, there's been areas where I've been asked questions like pain. Does he have a pain threshold? And I've got to be honest with you, yeah, he does. He doesn't feel it. He's got to get really, really hard, you know, to be hurt before he'll cry or before he'll do anything. You know, he can hurt himself, I says, and then it's minutes later before he recognises that he's hurt himself. Mm-hmm. He just cannot do much. He's got to be washed. He's got to be fed. He's got to be dressed. As I said, 24-hour care, 7 days a week. At first, when John was born, I was given a time scale. I was told he wouldn't reach adulthood. And that was a shocker to get told that for anybody. But here he is, he's coming up for 41 now. I said, and he's still going strong for what I know of him now. You know, I mean, we'll get through what's happened and where he is and the reasons why he's not with me just now in the future interviews. But as a moment, he has no chance of being on his own.
And in terms of communication, how does he communicate?
That's a difficult one, David. His recognition is based on, I understand him. My wife Janice understands him. We can understand what he wants, what he needs, but that's based on living with him for years and years and years. You build that up. There is no way that you could take John for a day, just be handed him, and you lead that day with him. You can't do it. John has got to be structured. His whole life has got to be structured. And as the one thing about John is he's a lovely boy, as I said, but he needs near enough everything done for him. There's not much that he can do himself. So,
your first marriage broke down, and obviously you had two children. So, could you just take us in brief outline in terms of how that played out? What arrangements were made? What agreements were made? How was the marriage breakup settled?
Right. The build up for the marriage breakup was based on the fact that my ex-wife couldn't cope with John. I was self-employed. My life was, I love my son. I would do anything for John. But I was a breadwinner. And I had to go make money, pay bills, but look after a disabled boy at the same time. My ex-wife, she wasn't a bad mother. I would never say she was a bad mother. Never have said she was a bad mother. But she couldn't cope with John. You got to remember, John's a big boy who can lash out if he's not happy. He will, he can hurt people. But at the same time, when we both looked after John, it was easy enough for people to say she couldn't cope with him. And as John got bigger, it got harder for her. And then it came to the stage that the pressures on both of us concerning John was on the basis that she didn't know how to progress with John. But at the same time, when we separated, John became like a weapon to her. Because when you separate and you've got a disabled boy, and back in the 90s, fathers weren't even recognised. We were looked upon, people, you just go out and earn. You come home, you look after the child, then you go back out and earn again. And when the separation came about, you go to court, you're looking for the best issue, the best what's best for you, best for your son, and best for your ex-wife. Ours was shared care. But my ex-wife at that time, she wanted the boy, but she only wanted the money that went with the boy. She didn't want John. And that's a fact, she didn't want John. Because even when we'd separated and John was in a school in Cumbernauld and they're planning his future was what she wanted, my ex-wife. What I wanted didn't count. Even though we went to court and we fought in court to see who was going to get John, being a father, courts always leaned on the side of the mother and they gave John to her. Somebody had to have the final say. So the courts went with the mother. But during that period of time, my ex-wife was already planning a future which John wasn't in. She was putting him into care. But she was never ever going to offer him to me. Because one of the reasons when we separated through the courts was that I got to see John on a basis where it was near enough 4 or 5 months out of the year. John stayed with me. The rest of it, he stayed with his mother. But even during that period of time when we were shared care, she was already planning to put John into care. And then before I knew it, I'm sitting in a school meeting at a school in Cumbernauld, and I'm getting told your son's getting taken into care. If you want to do anything about it, you need to take the local authorities and everybody to court.
Right. Okay. So that moved very quickly. Let's try and unpick that a wee bit. So up until this point, up until the point where care became an issue, what had been the position with the local authority? How much had they been involved? Had they been helpful? Had they been hostile? Where was the local authority in this up until care became an issue?
Until care became an issue, the local authority were never involved.
Right. So they were out of the picture. Okay. Your wife, for her own reasons, not coping or having other wishes for her life, just approached them to discuss John going into care. And there was no, and you knew nothing about it. This was essentially behind your back. You were completely out of the picture.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it was, if you're going to fight it, you have to fight legally the local authority with all the resources that they have.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, take us through step by step how that then played out. What happened next?
Well, what happened there was my ex-wife had approached the local authority. They went and found a home for John. They then contacted me, asked questions. How did you manage to do all this when I'm his father? I says, I've been to court. Court gave me 4 or 5 months, but it was always on the basis of my ex-wife didn't want John. He had to come to me. That was the basis. Myself and my wife at the time, partner, Janice, had already decided we'll take John. We even went and bought a brand new flat in Moodiesburn, got a room for John. Social work came down, checked the house out, checked everything out. And
so they knew.
Yeah, they knew everything.
That family care
was there. Yeah. They knew, and we had a social worker who came down to the house, and she came in, realised and says, oh, this is beautiful, it was a brand new flat. I says, bottom flat, we even made sure it was a bottom flat for John for access in and out, and it was brilliant. And then all of a sudden, we were called to a meeting and we're sitting in the school, and even the school didn't know this was happening. And we're sitting at a parent-teachers meeting, and I was always involved in that, and I'm sitting there and all of a sudden the local authority turn around and say, oh, by the way, your boy's going into care, and if you want to do anything about it, you're going to have to come to court with us. And I was flabbergasted. I just couldn't believe it.
That was with social work?
That was with social work. Cumbernauld social work department were involved in this, and they sat there and they told me, you want to do anything about this, you're going to have to take us to court. And I'm sitting there totally shocked. And in the school...
So you were in the dark and by the time you found out about it, the decision was already made. There was
Yeah.
no discussion, there was no involvement, there was no examination of options. They made the decision, and then you had to overturn the decision. That's the position
Yeah.
to put you in. Okay. Just before we go into the next part of this, you mentioned the school. Could you say just a little bit about John's schooling and what the school was like, and were they supportive? Were they helpful? Did they do things for John that were positive? What was the school?
Well, definitely. The school was called Redburn Primary. It was in South Kilbrain in Cumbernauld. And John went there since he was 5-year-old. By this time, he's 12-year-old boy, and he's beginning to look towards adulthood, when adult services sort of thing. So they have meetings about that. But at that time, this school was brilliant. They were brilliant with me. Nobody was a favourite parent. Both parents were recognised. Both of you were treated the same. You were both told everything. Although my ex-wife made decisions, they didn't look at it that way. They used it on the basis, this is a family school, where families mean a lot to the children. We want both parents involved, and that was fine. But even when it came to, when they were, social work were telling me that they're taking my son into a care home, the school turned around and says, this isn't the place for this. This should not be happening at this meeting. Why is this man not being told? And as I said, for then I was shocked. I just couldn't believe that a local authority didn't even have the decency to come to me. But this was after them coming to my home, recognising what I was doing for my son, and just didn't decide that they were going to give me the opportunity to do it.
Did your ex-wife give you any explanation as to the reasons for her actions?
Not at all. No. She. The one thing about my ex-wife is like, she never fights battles. She gets people to fight the battles for her.
Okay, so there was no direct
direct explanation, not a thing.
Okay, so you're now facing your son being taken into care. Could you talk us through how that then played out? What was the process that went through?
Process. That's a good question. Process. There was no process. For me, there wasn't a process. The process was done by social workers, my ex-wife, and all of a sudden, in comes the Church of Scotland, a home found for John, and they were taking him in. You know, even my rights as a father were being totally ignored, to the extent like, this home, John was getting in, I was getting told, you can't do nothing about this. I've got a family, I've got a loving family, who at the time I approached them and I says, I need help here. They're trying to take my son away from me. And they were like, what are they doing? So my sisters, I've got 2 elder sisters, and I says, they're trying to take my son away from me. And they were like, but can you look after him? I says, of course I can look after him. But you've got a business, you've got to pay the bills, you've got to do this. I says, that doesn't matter. I says, that's my business. If I've got to do that, I'll do that. So all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and even my family went against me, and they turned around, do you not think maybe this home would be a good place for John, and it'll allow you and Janice to go on with your life, and you can go and see him when you feel like it. And I've got to say, for the first time in my life, I actually listened to what my sister said, and I sat, and even my partner Janice and my wife now says to me, why don't you try this place, see what it's like. Now I felt the pressure on me from my own family, but I said, well, maybe this is the right thing to do. Maybe what I'm doing is not is not for John. I said, it might be for John, sorry, I meant that. It might be for John, and maybe I'm doing the wrong thing by keeping him away from it. And I said, okay, I'll go visit it.
Right, because you're in a unique position. Deciding what is actually the best outcome is far from straightforward. Okay, so you're looking at the options. So you went to see it. What did you make of it? When you first saw it, what did you think? You should also say what institution are we talking about?
The institution we're talking about, David, is called the Malard. It's a residential home, and it was for learning disability children, and it's based up in Springburn in Glasgow, and it's run fully by the Church of Scotland. And my ex-wife, by that time, had made social work, been visited it. She decided that's where John was going, and nothing was going to stop that. And as I said, Malard went up, visited it. It looked nice. It was plain, you know. I was shown a room, but when I went there, I felt like, oh, this place has been, they're told I'm coming. And I felt like they were putting a show on for me. I didn't take very well to the chap that ran the place. He was just overboard. He was right on me as soon as I arrived in the place. And eventually I said, okay, what do I do here? I wanted my son to come and live with me. But here was a place that everybody was, at that time was pressuring me. My sisters were pressuring me to allow John to go to this place. And I says, okay, eventually I'll go for it, I'll try it, I'll see how it goes. But that was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, was allowing that to happen.
So John was taken into full local authority care on the 2nd of November 1995. This was under Section 15 of the Social Work Scotland Act 1968. Now, that act actually highlights the importance of parental care and states that if a parent or guardian or family friend can undertake the care, that should happen. So it's a little odd, given the circumstances, that they used that act to take him into care where there was the option of you taking care of him. So that seems a little odd. But that's when it formally happened. But there was some sort of taster sessions or trial sessions before that, is that right?
Yeah, John was taken into care, David, in October 1995, and that was to see whether he settled in, or whether it would be the right place for him, and then a decision would be made to take him into total local authority care, and that took place on the 2nd of November 1995.
So the initial few weeks went okay?
No. John, in his first 4 or 5 weeks in there, he never settled down. See, one of the hardest things that people didn't realise at the time was you can tell when there's a problem with your children. I could tell John there was a problem with John. The way when I approached him in the place for the 5 weeks, he wasn't happy. But what you've got to realise, even though John was taken into care in October 1995, you've got to remember, I had a court order that allowed me access to John. And that's one thing I never done. Even though if this home was going to be the place that my son was going to stay, there was no way on earth that I was ever giving up my rights to access to my son. Even though my son went in there, I began to say to myself, which I don't know was a good thing at the time, I was like, what have I done? What have I done? This is my son. He's been taken into a home. I wasn't thinking that serious stuff was happening to him at the time, but he was taken into this home and I was allowing it to happen. And I just couldn't bring myself to accept that my son was in a care home. But one of the things that the local authority did, and they were very quick on the move, was trying to take my order off me that I'd received from Airdrie Sheriff Court. And within weeks and months of John being in this home, they were trying to get me to give up my order. And the funny thing was, I used the order. It was a strange thing, you know, you put your son into a care home, you're expecting him to be happy, you to have a transition of not seeing your son as much as what you were doing. And then I knew something was wrong. I realised something was wrong. And one of the things was because of refusing to give up the order that I'd received for the court, I was still getting my son coming to stay with me, and I was able to witness the change in him for when he went into this home.
Okay. So what were you seeing?
Well, this was a boy who, when he went in there, he was happy. He wasn't wetting himself. He wasn't dirtying himself. Who became very seclusive. He didn't want you to touch him. He, sometimes when he was going back, he didn't want to go back. And you're not thinking the worst at that time. But because I still had this order, I still had to take my son back to his home. Which, even although when I was with my ex-wife, John was staying with me almost 4 months, 5 months out of the year. That was based on the fact of 2 weeks holiday, summer, week at Easter, week at Christmas, a day during every alternative week. John stayed with me, and I kept that right through his 4 years. I never gave that up. I done it all the time. But then I had local authority come and saying to me, we're spending a lot of money on your son being in care, and here you're taking him home. And I'm like, I don't care. I says, I'm not giving my son up. And I was getting figures fired at me by the local authority telling me how much it was costing me.
Hold on, back it up. Their position is we're paying for him to be in a care home. Therefore, we want to get our money's worth. Right? That seems completely backwards. Sure, in monetary terms, they're going to be paying anyway, right? It's not costing them any more. And secondly, the priority must surely be John and his best interest. Not value for money for the local authority. That seems extraordinary.
Well, back in 1995, that local authority were paying, I think it was working out £1,500–1,600 a week for John on a 24/7 basis. And that is what they're looking at. This boy's no in there all that week. There's an empty bed. And when you look at it, that's 4 months he's staying with me. And 4 months at that's £25,000 a year. They're paying out for a boy who's not sleeping in that bed.
Well, that's surely something that they could take up with the Malard care home.
Yep.
What's it got to do with you?
Yeah, but the reason was that they were using this was the fact that they knew stuff was happening to John.
Well, let's go slowly at this point, right? So they're pressuring you to give up parental rights. Is that correct?
That's what it is, yeah.
Right. How did that actually play out? What did they say or do or write to you? Or what actually happened there?
They didn't write to me. They didn't explain to me. They just says, this can't work. And I'd say, well, that was your problem. You took the boy into care knowing that a father was willing to look after him. A father went into a court and fought for time with his son, where, in every sheriff court, it was unknown for a father like me to be given that amount of care, time to look after his son. And but that was given on the basis that John wasn't getting taken into care. The words of taking John into care never existed when we were fighting in the court. It just was not something brought up by the court.
So were the local authorities trying to, was it kind of an informal pressure, or were they actually doing anything legal to?
No, there was no legal. They couldn't, because they would need to go to court.
Right.
They would have to go. I had parental rights.
So they're trying to persuade you to change voluntarily what you're doing.
Yeah. If it wasn't until
voluntarily, but under pressure.
Yeah, but if it wasn't until later on, when there was a full-blown investigation into John, that I discovered that even the local authority care paperwork for the Section 15, as you call it, paperwork, wasn't exactly a Section 15. It was a Section 25 full care order, that had been done behind my back again. And that meant that the local authority had taken John illegally into care on the basis of Section 15, which was voluntary care order.
Yes.
Right, so the voluntary care order never existed. It was a lie. It was always a Section 25. Now, the thing about the Section 25 is if you've ever put a child into care, you'll find when you sign a child into care, they fill out documentation. And this document is a page, it's a local authority page thing, and there's about 20 odd pages in it. And this document gets filled out by a local authority on the basis of the child getting taken into care, and the document has got the mother's page, whether she can look after him, whether she can't look after him. And then there's her family. Does anybody in her family want to look after John?
Right, so the actual form is asking these questions?
Yeah, the form asks
Okay.
these questions, whether anybody in the family can look after John. And if one of them would actually go and say yes, they can take John.
Okay.
So it came to my page. And when I managed to find these forums, 3, 4 years later, when I seen this forum, an acceptance into care form, filled in by a local authority, my page, I was called not applicable. So you've got Father John Shields underneath, can he do this? Not applicable. Can he do that? Not applicable. Not applicable. All the way down the whole page. My family turned round. Not applicable. Not applicable. Not applicable. They wiped my family off the face of the earth. The local authority.
So they were taken under the Section 25 order essentially fraudulently.
Yeah, definitely fraudulent. I've discovered that it was a fraudulent act by a local authority.
And could you say a little bit more about what a Section 25 order is?
Well, when I got to see, as I said, I thought this was a voluntarily, voluntarily means my ex-wife signed her son away on the basis that she couldn't look after him. But if she wanted, she had the right to take him out any time she wanted. Mm-hmm. That's what it meant. But because I was there as a father, she couldn't do that because that child had to be offered to me. That's what the rules meant. That's what this documentation, this big forum means. There's a parent there willing to look after the child. So that child should have been offered to me before any Section 15 or Section 25 was done. But during the period when they're taking John into care, you do have meetings with social work. So you're sitting with social work and they're talking, this documentation, filling out this form, filling out this form. But as for me as John's father, there was no forms for me to fill. I never seen a form. And the forms that are based just now that I have got possession of show a local authority taking my son illegally into care. And they were terrified. To me, they were scared or terrified because of what was going on, that I was going to find this out. And I did.
So, to bring this part one to a close, what I want to finish on is when you started to appreciate there was something really wrong, really badly and seriously wrong going on at the Malard care home. And how John reacted to that, and what in his behaviour got you from being unhappy that John wasn't as happy as he had been to really concerned that there was something grievous happening. What was the point at which you thought this is really bad?
Well, when you visit, I used to visit my son, and they would be at the home, and don't get me wrong, the home made me welcome. You would in asking questions. You always felt there was avoidance. We always knew there was something not right. The back of you, like when they came to talk to you, ask them questions, you get this feeling something isn't right. It doesn't matter who these people were. The place like the Malard itself, it's a place where it's run by the Church of Scotland. It's looked after by members of staff who are they're introduced to you, but you know nothing about them. You don't know who they are from Adam. And you've got to rely on the fact that when you're not there, they're going to look after your son. But when things happen in a care home setting, you're a parent, you're the last person who's going to be told that there's a problem. As far as they're saying, there is no problem. As I said, and at that time, I knew there was a problem. So, being a father, as I says, when they took John into care, I gave that situation a chance to see how it was going to play out. But here I wasn't even 5-6 weeks into it, and my son's acting different. And it wasn't a case of like a new place. My son would settle down anywhere, I think, if people were nice to him. He knew something was wrong. And it came to the stage, I knew something was wrong. For John, as we get into John's past, and we talk about it here, what went on in that care home, is like his first 6 weeks, from what I found out, were absolutely horrendous. That's in a care home. And the thing, even before John was taken into full local authority care, bad things had happened to him. And yet they still went ahead and took him into care. I knew something was wrong. I'm questioning. And then I was told, because I didn't want to take John, allow John to be there, this was the reasons I was getting thrown. You didn't want to do this, you didn't want to do that, you weren't happy with this, you weren't happy with that. Now that was true, and I'm not going to lie about it. I wasn't.
But you're raising concerns about John's behaviour changing.
Yeah.
And the response is, you're the problem.
I became the problem. That was the feeling when you went up there, was like, tell him nothing. Show him nothing. So every time when you went to a care home, you could access what had been happening.
Yeah.
So you read it and you go like, God, that's nothing happening here. But when you look at John and seeing how John was acting, I was seeing situations where a disabled boy, you can't speak. That's one other reason about John. John cannot speak. He cannot utter. He might be able to force out words. He does able to do some voices. But John, usually when there's a problem, he'll go, I was getting that all the time. That was my son. And he was crying out for help. But I couldn't do a thing because the local authority were controlling this. And the Church of Scotland knew I was delving deeper and deeper into what happened to my son.
And just tell us a little bit more about the behavioural changes you were seeing and what was alarming you.
What was alarming me was because every time you looked at a sheet of paper, here was a wee boy toilet trained, wetting himself. Wee boy toilet trained when he went in there, he'd do the toilet, bowel movement. He lets you know what is going to be, like for the toilet, and if he was just going to do a stand-up toilet, he'll point down, and that's how you know that he was needing it. And he would tell me he needed a toilet. And a bowel movement, he would tell you needed a bowel movement to sit down. He can't speak, but he was able to point that that's what he was wanting. But here you had a sheet. The boy was doing the toilet anywhere. And another thing was, I had a school where John was getting picked up in a taxi early morning, taken to Cumbernauld, which from the Malard home is about 12-14 miles. Every morning And then I discovered my son was getting tuffed out of bed at 7:30. Sometimes he wouldn't even eat breakfast. He was getting sent to school. Look, I'm going to be honest with you, he was looking like a tramp. He wasn't getting dressed right. And then I would get phone calls from the school going on about how John was attacking the aide that was in the taxi with him, attacking other children, going to school, falling asleep in school. And they're like, what's happening to John? This isn't John. And I'm like, I'll find out. But you were just met with a blank. They wouldn't tell you nothing. And then when you find out there's a wee boy getting thrown out of his bed at 7:30 in the morning, to be taken away at 8:30. And during that period of time, they couldn't get him to do a bowel movement. They couldn't get him to do the toilet. He wouldn't eat his breakfast. He was just knackered. The boy was tired. That's what the reports were saying. That you would get John very tired, up during the night, wouldn't sleep, walking about a home. I was getting told sometimes he was taking his clothes off because he'd wet himself. He's walking about a home. They're like, why is he doing this? This isn't my son. He didn't do it in my house, so living with me. Why is he doing this? But if you ask the local authority and you ask the church, you're just causing problems. They couldn't even answer you why you doing it. You know, there's a couple of times I was told my son was walking about this home naked. No clothes on at all. And you're saying to yourself, why is he doing this? Myself and my partner were getting told this, and we're sitting at night going, why is he doing this? No clothes on? What's wrong? And then we just heard him say, this isn't care. This is just not care. Something is wrong here.
So we'll pause there, John. In the second part of this, we'll go on to talk about much more severe abuse that then came to light at the Malard, and how you withdrew John and essentially saved him from that abuse. So that'll be part 2. Until then, John Shields, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.